Hello, as promised, we're going to be talking about The Thing Around Your Neck by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, one of the best short story collections I have read this year, both from a just enjoyment perspective of reading stories that I was invested in, I was very immersed in, but also from a discussion perspective. I read this for a book club discussion that went very well. I also spent maybe almost an hour or more discussing this with Rachel from Let Me in the Library, which I will have her channel down below, because who knows how compiled my thoughts will actually end up being when this video is over, but I could not have had whatever thoughts I have without our discussions. She was great to just kind of post-buddy read this book with, because she read it before me. And yeah, it's just a really great sampling of short stories by this amazing author. It's a great sampling of both Nigerian experiences in Nigeria or as immigrants pursuing the American dream. You get different regions and conflicts within Nigeria. You get different power struggles and dynamics in all the scenarios. It is a really interesting and diverse collection of short stories that really sparked my interest in wanting to read other works, which I'll talk about at the end of the video, but just was a really great experience. And before I get further, I also watched two other reviews that I really recommend you check out. And one is Justin from Ghost Reader. I think this was his first review on his channel, which is quite impressive because I really liked it. He had a really good review on this and what he took away from it. And also, there is the channel A Bookish Pair. I'm not sure where they're from, but they had a lot of really interesting perspectives and thoughts on some of these short stories that I hadn't come up with, because I don't know if you don't know this, but I'm not Nigerian, so I don't necessarily take away the same things from the stories that these women did, who they specifically read a lot of African literature, and I really enjoyed their discussions on some of the stories in this collection and their thoughts overall. So I highly recommend checking all of those out if you have read this short story collection and just want more discussion, or if you want to know if you want to pick this up and just like reviews. I'm hoping to satisfy both parties with this review, someone who has read it and someone looking into it. There won't be spoilers in terms of the actual plots, but I will be discussing the themes you're going to find in these stories and the stories that really stuck out to me. So let's get into it. So let's talk about the themes. So I've already briefly talked about this, but what it means to be Nigerian is a big theme across all these stories, whether that is a Nigerian in Nigeria, or if you're a Nigerian immigrant coming to America and what your circumstance is in doing that. These are experiences you're going to get in every story, and I really found all of that compelling. It also goes into the cultural differences between people in Nigeria based off religion or section of the country, and I thought that was really interesting. And I got to learn more about Nigeria than I knew in terms of the government, police corruption, and also different rebellions that have happened in the past, different civil wars sort of thing. Things that I didn't know about but were brought into these stories, and I feel like a really seamless way. I feel like there were also really big discussions about gender roles in Nigeria and just in general. Most of these, I think only one story is from the point of view of a male character. The rest are all female characters, and it's their relationship with the men in their life, with the different power struggle dynamics they're in within each story, and you can't ignore that theme throughout this collection. I thought it was done really well and from many different angles that were very compelling. There was also really good discussion on one's relationship with tradition. Especially, I think this is something all cultures and all people have to think about. When you are a person in present times, how much do you, pay homage to the tradition of your family? How much do you move forward? How much do you change? I felt like this was done in really great ways throughout different stories, both contemporary stories and ones that were put into the past 100 years ago, I think. And that discussion I thought was very relatable for all people, but it was also really interesting to look at it from that historical lens through the Nigerian experience, especially because of the colonialization you get to see in one of the stories. And in a similar vein, you have stories where there's this whole pressure to perform for the white culture. What is African enough when you are a person? How much of yourself do you have to give away or perform, to be exotic, to be seen as African enough, to be defined not just by yourself, which is hard enough, but to then be defined by this other culture who can tell you whether or not you are being, first of all, just the idea of being African enough when Africa has over 50 countries, but to be told, are you enough? No, that's not the right story to be told. This was a theme that was, I thought, really well done across like 3 stories, and I'll talk about that in the next section where I'll highlight a few stories, but that was a big theme I took away. And also something I've noticed that I haven't seen a lot of reviewers talk about, so maybe it was just something I noticed, and Rachel and I talked about it and the book club did, is that in each story, it feels like the protagonist is trapped either physically or metaphorically. And the stories tend to end abruptly. And for me, I actually really liked where they end because I felt they always ended after a pivotal change. Whether this change helped the character to become untrapped or maybe did something else, I just felt like, okay, we were in the story when we were in this state, and now the state has changed, and that's when the story ends. We don't get to know what happens after that change, which I know is jarring, but I thought that was actually a really interesting device and actually kept me wanting more as I read the collection, because I felt like since this collection had so many overarching themes that were consistent throughout all the stories, I never felt disjointed like you can in some short story collections. Like you can get this burnout because you're just jumping from new thing to new thing, and that brain reset can be exhausting, and I didn't feel that in this short story collection because of these consistent themes, and because I got used to that pattern of, okay, our character is stuck or trapped, and then something happens, and now I don't get to know what happens next, but I know something different will probably happen next, if that makes sense. So let's talk about some of the highlight stories. I think my favorite is The Headstrong Historian. This is the last story in the collection. This is the one that takes place 100 years ago, and you have this woman whose son, they are struggling to keep control of their land, so she sends him to learn English, and through this process he becomes basically assimilated into white culture and kind of rebels against the traditions. And then his daughter kind of takes the traditions back, and it's that whole arc, and I just loved it. I loved the grandmother, I loved the granddaughter. It's a really great story, and I think it really had some really great messages in it, but just also, I just really enjoyed it. Another story that was like a standout to me and actually really helped open my eyes to some of the cultural struggles that are in Nigeria is A Private Experience. This is a story of 2 women who are accidentally caught within a riot that's breaking out between 2 different religious sides, and they have to hide in this building throughout the story. And they are ironically actually from the different religious sides, and they have come together and are trying not to stress about other things that may be lost, and it's just this private experience, and it's a beautiful story, and I think relatable to everyone, but also helped me learn a little bit about Nigeria. The 3 stories that I think talk about performing for white culture was The Jumping Monkey Hill, The Thing Around Your Neck, and The American Embassy. I think it does this in very striking ways. The Jumping Monkey Hill is this convention where different African authors from different countries come together, and this white man who knows everything about Africa judges the writing that they're doing. And our main character is writing a story that is her story. It's basically biographical, and it's striking how judgmental everyone is and how they make claims about whether it could be a true story or not when we know it is a true story. And just it makes you cringe, but it's so real how in every culture that is not, every marginalized culture has to try and fight to say, just because I'm not doing X doesn't mean I am not blank. I think I see it a lot with Silvia Moreno Garcia on Twitter. She's like, just because, the Dia de los Muertos should not be in my story because it's not November. Like, that doesn't make it less Mexican. Like, that's a tweet I saw. And this happens all the time where people who are not of that culture decide what defines that culture. And it's absurd. And that came through so well, as did different parts of gender roles, etc. And on the flip side, American Embassy, a woman has just tragically lost her son and she needs to gain asylum. And to gain asylum, she has to tell her story at the embassy. And she can't. And she refuses. It's too personal, it's too hers, so she won't be able to get that asylum. And I thought that was also really interesting. It was just a different flipped coin of that, and that just really stuck with me, and I didn't notice that until Rachel and I were talking about it. So that's particularly one that she brought to the forefront of my mind. And there are just so many other stories. Like, we literally didn't expect to discuss all 12 stories in book club, and we did. Like, I could probably go on for much longer about all of these, but that's just like a taste of some of the stories that really struck me. And like, gosh, Imitation is such a good story. That really shows one of the Nigerian immigration experiences. So does Arrangers of Marriage, and both of those not only show immigration experience, but gender roles and the marriage relationship there. It's just, I don't know, I just want to read so much more of her work now, because these stories were so good. To be good at short stories is such an art. It is so hard to write short stories that are, well, for me, I thought they were satisfying, but also keep you thinking and were enjoyable. Like, to click all the boxes is what she has done here, and it was phenomenal. And because of this short story collection, I really want to read more Nigerian literature because I'm interested. She has made me very interested in a country that I really don't know much about. There was actually in one story, Ghosts, that was not my favorite short story, but it did bring up a conflict in Nigeria that I knew nothing about. And I know that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has written the story Half of a Yellow Sun, and it's about that conflict as well. So I really want to read that by her. And I also was reminded there is this story that I've been wanting to read for a really long time called Stay With Me. And this is about, I think it's contemporary. I could be wrong because I haven't read it. But there's this couple, a Nigerian couple, and they're having problems having a kid. So the family wants the son to have more wives to increase the probability of getting a kid. And it's that struggle there because it's, I think, more contemporary. And the married couple aren't necessarily like into this. They want to try and just have a kid themselves. And that struggle was kind of in The Headstrong Historian. So that reminded me of this story. And I'm like, I really want to read this story. And I also want to read some nonfiction. Next time I pick up nonfiction, I don't know if I want it to necessarily be just Nigeria, but I need more nonfiction about either, I think West Africa I would definitely want some of, or maybe just Nigeria specifically, but I want to find more things like that because this book just really made me excited to learn more because it showed me a gap in my knowledge, and it showed it to me in a way that made me want to learn more. That is great art. That is so good when art can make you excited and want to learn. So hopefully this was interesting to you. I really recommend the short story collection. She is a master at her craft, and I think you can get something from this. I mean, our entire book club really enjoyed it. I think for a short story collection, it's hard to give ratings. We gave it like a 4.5 star. So, and that's a group of like 20 people. So maybe not a large N, but we generally don't always agree that strongly. So I really, really recommend picking this up. And if you've read it, please discuss in the comments with me what stories really stuck out to you, what you took away from these works. I would love to have a discussion down in the comments about it. And if you've made it this far and just want me to know you're here, put a sun down, because I mentioned Half of a Yellow Sun. That works. And like if you like it, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.